When you think of World War II in the Pacific, a few names spring to mind. MacArthur, Nimitz, maybe even Tojo. But no one quite captures the contradictions of the war like Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. Here was a man who despised war, orchestrated one of its most infamous attacks, and then became a cautionary tale about the costs of hubris. So let's dive into the life of the reluctant admiral who changed the course of history, one bold gamble at a time. Born in 1884 in Japan, rapidly modernizing under Emperor Meiji, Isoroku Yamamoto started life as Isoroku Takano. His father, a former samurai, ensured that young Isoroku was steeped in both traditional values and the new ideals of a Japan eager to stand toe-to-toe with the Western powers. When his parents died, Yamamoto was adopted by the Yamamoto family, giving him not just a new name, but also a new destiny. Despite his traditional upbringing, Yamamoto's career path was anything but. In 1901, he entered the Naval Academy, where he excelled despite his penchant for mischief. His early naval service saw him wounded in the Russo-Japanese War. He lost 2 fingers in a naval battle, but gained an unshakable reputation for resilience. Yamamoto wasn't just a naval officer, he was a gambler at heart. He loved shogi, Japan's version of chess, and poker. Ironic, considering he would later gamble with his nation's fate. This fascination with strategy and risk became a hallmark of his career. After World War I, Yamamoto spent time in the United States, studying at Harvard and later serving as a naval attaché. He admired much about America, its industry, its innovation, and even its aviation culture. What he didn't admire, its potential to outproduce Japan in a drawn-out war. Yamamoto understood the danger of provoking the United States better than almost anyone in the Japanese high command. But we'll get to that. When Isoroku Yamamoto first stepped onto American soil in 1919, it wasn't as the formidable admiral we remember, but as a curious naval officer with a keen mind and an insatiable hunger for knowledge. He attended Harvard University as part of a Japanese government program aimed at learning from the West. Little did anyone know, these years would profoundly shape his worldview and his later role in history. At Harvard, Yamamoto studied everything from economics to international relations, but his most valuable lessons came from observing American society. The United States in the 1920s was booming, an industrial powerhouse riding high on post-war optimism. Yamamoto was particularly struck by America's capacity for mass production. Factories churned out cars, steel, and aircraft at a pace that Japan could barely imagine. This first-hand exposure planted the seeds of a realization that would haunt him years later. In a long war, Japan would struggle to match the industrial might of the United States. But Yamamoto didn't just bury his nose in books or marvel at assembly lines. He also took to the card tables, sharpening his poker skills and developing an appreciation for American ingenuity and innovation. These years at Harvard weren't just about learning the rules of international politics. They were about understanding the mindset of his future adversaries. Yamamoto respected the Americans for their creativity and tenacity, traits he would later fear in wartime. He also noted the democratic spirit of the United States, something that stood in stark contrast to Japan's hierarchical and rigid society. Yamamoto, ever the pragmatist, understood that this spirit gave the US a unique resilience, a kind of cultural elasticity that would allow it to adapt and innovate under pressure. After leaving Harvard, Yamamoto carried with him a blend of admiration and apprehension for the United States. He often warned his superiors in Japan not to underestimate America's potential. In the first 6 months of war, he once predicted, Japan will win victory after victory, but if the war lasts longer than that, I have no expectation of success. This prophecy, born of his observations at Harvard and during his later diplomatic assignments in the US, would tragically come true. So, while Yamamoto's time at Harvard might not have involved drafting naval battle plans or designing aircraft carriers, it gave him something arguably more important: a clear-eyed understanding of his opponent. In the end, his years in America left him both inspired and wary, a man caught between admiration for what he saw and the inevitability of a confrontation he wished to avoid. Before Isoroku Yamamoto, naval warfare was largely a game of battleships, massive, floating fortresses designed to slug it out in epic clashes. Yamamoto, however, saw the winds of change. During his time in the United States, he observed the rise of aviation and became convinced that the future of naval warfare would be fought not on the sea, but above it. Back in Japan, Yamamoto became a staunch advocate for naval aviation, pushing for the development of aircraft carriers and innovative tactics that would leverage air power. His foresight was instrumental in transforming the Imperial Japanese Navy into one of the most formidable forces in the Pacific, at least in the early years of the war. The attack on Pearl Harbor was the culmination of this vision. Instead of battleships leading the charge, Yamamoto placed his faith in carriers like the Akagi and Kaga. This bold shift in strategy blindsided the Americans, whose battleships lay crippled at Pearl Harbor while Japan's carriers roamed supreme, at least temporarily. But Yamamoto wasn't just a visionary, he was also a pragmatist. He knew Japan's industrial base couldn't match America's and believed the only chance for victory lay in decisive early strikes. In a way, Yamamoto's advocacy for aviation wasn't just about winning battles. It was about buying time he knew Japan desperately needed but could never truly afford. By the late 1930s, Yamamoto had risen to become Commander-in-Chief of Japan's combined fleet. It was here that he found himself at odds with many in Japan's military elite. They wanted war with the US. Yamamoto wanted to avoid it like the plague. He knew Japan's chances of long-term victory were slim to none. But when orders came down from the emperor, Yamamoto's loyalty prevailed. If Japan was going to war, he would make sure it started with a bang, or more accurately, a barrage of torpedoes. Yamamoto masterminded the attack on Pearl Harbor with a mix of strategic brilliance and chilling pragmatism. His goal? Knock the US Navy out of the Pacific long enough for Japan to consolidate its gains. The attack on December 7, 1941 was a tactical triumph, but a strategic blunder. Yamamoto himself famously remarked, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." Spoiler alert, he was right. The initial months of the war seemed to vindicate Yamamoto's gamble. Japanese forces swept through Southeast Asia and the Pacific, leaving chaos in their wake. But then came Midway, Yamamoto's Waterloo. The plan was bold as always. Yamamoto aimed to lure the US Pacific Fleet into a trap by attacking the strategically vital Midway Atoll. What he didn't know was that American codebreakers had cracked Japan's communications. Instead of ambushing the US Navy, Yamamoto's forces walked into their own trap. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 was a turning point in the Pacific War. Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers to America's 1, and its momentum was irreparably halted. Yamamoto's reputation took a hit, but he remained committed to his nation's war effort. For him, surrender was unthinkable. If Yamamoto's life was a chess game, his assassination was the ultimate checkmate. By 1943, US intelligence had pinpointed Yamamoto's whereabouts thanks to intercepted communications. On April 18th, his transport plane was ambushed by American P-38 Lightning fighters over Bougainville in the Solomon Islands. The mission, codenamed Operation Vengeance, was a meticulously planned execution. Yamamoto's plane crashed in the jungle, and Japan's greatest naval strategist was gone. His death was both a psychological blow to Japan and a symbolic victory for the Allies. But it also raised uncomfortable questions. Was it ethical to target a single man? Did his death shorten the war, or did it simply shift the burden to his successors? So, what do we make of Isoroku Yamamoto? He was a man of contradictions, a military genius who hated war, a traditionalist who admired Western innovation, and a gambler who ultimately lost his greatest wager. His life is a reminder that history isn't black and white. It's filled with shades of gray, shaped by human decisions and marred by human flaws. Even today, Yamamoto is a polarizing figure. In Japan, he's often celebrated for his strategic brilliance and sense of duty. In the West, he's remembered as the architect of Pearl Harbor, but perhaps his own words offer the best insight into his character. In the end, the only thing that matters is whether or not I did my duty to my emperor and my nation. And there you have it, the story of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the man who gambled with history and paid the ultimate price. If you enjoyed this dive into the life of one of World War II's most fascinating figures, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments who you'd like us to cover next. Until then, keep questioning, keep learning, and remember, history is never as simple as it seems.